Over the course of many long years and decades, repeats of classic Doctor Who on the BBC's terrestrial channels have been generally a rare occasion, sparing the opportunity for fans to rewatch older stories. Making this an exciting opportunity for Whovians may not seem much of a deal for conversation in a day and age when the entirety of the original run of classic Doctor Who from 1963 to 1996 is available either on DVD or Blu-ray or through streaming services. Whereas episodes of modern Doctor Who have been regularly shown on BBC3, serials of classic Who have usually been preserved for special occasions. When older stories are repeated, these have usually been for anniversary events, specially themed tributes in the form of new edited versions, or for short repeat seasons as part of a retrospective of British sci-fi or vintage BBC drama. Back in the 20th century, BBC repeats of stories was especially important for Whovians, as not every story was commercially available to watch on home media, and not everyone was able to watch the series on satellite channel UK Gold. Terrestrial BBC repeats were an essential format to view older serials. The BBC's reruns of Doctor Who would have been the only commercial way to watch several older stories for many years. Some serials that were repeated in the 1990s on BBC2 took up to 10 years to be made available on VHS. The opportunity to watch previously unavailable stories was a great luxury for fans when accessing stories was virtually impossible to ascertain. Even to the present day, television channels, including the BBC, are restricted to a limited number of types of programming throughout the year. For the BBC, corporation is only allowed to run a limited number of repeats of older programs throughout the year that may be more than a couple of years old. This is due to the rights with unions between actors and musicians, preventing many older programs featuring respective actors within TV shows from being repeated. This has also significantly impacted the number of repeats for Doctor Who programs. Nevertheless, fans of classic Who understand the importance of repeating earlier stories to fulfill the exposure of fans' pleasure in watching their favourite series, and often the continuity announcements for these repeats have been included as fun special features among the DVD and Blu-ray ranges.
Throughout this investigation, we will be analysing the impact the individual reruns of serials across 60 years had upon fans. Notice how throughout the BBC's run of older stories, the same serials are commonly repeated. Some seasons have had none of their stories ever rerun by the BBC, such as seasons 3 and 24, and some have had nearly all their episodes at some point rerun, such as seasons 7, 10, 12, and 14. Any fan of Doctor Who will know that the first episode of the series aired the day after the assassination of President JFK in Dallas, Texas, on Saturday, the 23rd of November 1963 at 5:16 p.m. The shocking news that filled newspaper headlines across the world meant that the launch of a new sci-fi series on the BBC was perhaps of little significance to the British public. The impact of the news meant that the ratings of the first episode were lower than anticipated for the BBC, leading to the very first episode, An Unearthly Child, being repeated the following week, along with the next episode, The Cave of Skulls. A power blackout in various parts of the UK had also meant that a portion of viewers across the country were unable to watch the start of Doctor Who on the 23rd of November. The first episode of the series attracted only 4.4 million viewers, which was 9.1% of the British viewing public. The repeated episode began at 5:05 p.m. and was unlisted and unscheduled, but boosted the ratings for this episode up to 6 million viewers. The only other story repeated throughout the 1960s was The Evil of the Daleks, shown throughout the summer of 1968, and was aimed to bridge the gap between seasons 5 and 6. It is believed that the master recordings for these stories held by the BBC were wiped at some point after the rerun of these episodes. In the entirety of the 1960s, only 8 episodes of Doctor Who were repeated, and only one complete story was reshown. As the programme was regularly on virtually every Saturday, the likelihood of rerunning earlier stories seemed less likely as the BBC would soon begin to get rid of early episodes of the programme, resulting in dozens of episodes never to be seen again in the UK. As Doctor Who moved into the 1970s and into colour with the BBC, the prospect of rerunning old black and white episodes was of little chance as the BBC focused on colour television. With the reinvigorated Doctor Who now in colour on BBC1, the first repeated story that was reshown by the BBC in the 1970s took place with Spearhead from Space on BBC1, running on Friday night in July 1971. Throughout the 1970s, BBC One often scheduled an omnibus edited version of a recent story for a Christmas special Doctor Who repeat, and attracted some of the highest viewing figures for Doctor Who in the programme's entire run on BBC television. The Demons was the first of these edits in December 1971, The Sea Devils in December 1972, The Green Death in December 1973, and Planet of the Spiders in December 1974. There were other rare screenings of older serials, usually as filler material such as the repeat of Day of the Daleks in September 1973, or a rerun of the Sea Devils edit in June 1974. Omnibus edits typically lasted between an hour to an hour and a half, and these continued into the Tom Baker era. The repeats continued to achieve high ratings and match the high levels of the programme's new episodes. The Ark in Space and Genesis of the Daleks were reshown in 1975 under omnibus formats, as were Planet of Evil, Pyramids of Mars, and The Brain of Morbius throughout 1976. By this stage, omnibus edits of stories were being replaced with uncut retransmissions of stories such as the Sontaran Experiment in 1976 and The Deadly Assassin in 1977, infamously removing part of the controversial cliffhanger for Part 3 from the master tape of the story. The BBC were still continuing to rerun recent stories that were maybe from the previous or penultimate season, following a two-part 50-minute version screening of The Robots of Death for the New Year's Eve 1977 and New Year's Day 1978 BBC One lineup. Repeats of stories from the previous season were shown in summer blocks ahead of the new season. For example, in the summer of 1978, The Invisible Enemy and The Sunmakers were repeated. In 1979, BBC One repeated The Pirate Planet and The Androids of Tara, and in 1980, Destiny of the Daleks and City of Death were reshown. This trend of repeating two of last season's stories ran through to 1981, following the end of a repeat run of Full Circle and The Keeper of Traken. Seasons 18 and 19 marked the longest gap up to that point between any new Doctor Who being broadcast. With the excitement of a new Doctor and a new era beginning in 1982, producer John Nathan Turner considered looking to find a way to help bridge the gap between these two seasons for fans, and remind viewers that there were other Doctors before Tom Baker. JNT organised the first repeat season dedicated on Doctor Who, which will be broadcast on BBC2, the first time Who had been shown on that channel.
The Five Faces of Doctor Who repeat season featured a story from every Doctor's era.
An Unearthly Child, The Crotons, The Three Doctors, Carnival of Monsters, and The Gopolis were shown midweek throughout November to December 1981, and offered fans the first opportunity to rewatch far older stories than had been allowed previously.
Allowing fans to watch a flavour of each Doctor's era, and attracted a new popularity to the series for lending viewers the opportunity to delve further into the legacy within the series to key stories. The run of stories chosen were particularly exciting for fans, rerunning the very first ever Doctor Who story alongside the only surviving four-part Second Doctor serial then in the archives, alongside the multi-Doctor story The Three Doctors, bringing together the first three Doctors together. The Mask of Mandragora was also slated for the rerun to represent the bulk of the Tom Baker era, but due to the BBC's Christmas schedule, the planned run of 6 stories was cut down to 5. The Five Faces repeat run was highly successful, with the two John Pertwee serials averaging over 5 million viewers. From this success, BBC One launched another repeat season in 1982, Doctor Who and the Monsters. This was once again organised by JNT and featured classic monster-themed stories to show. Stories that featured the Daleks, the Cybermen, and the Ice Warriors. Shown across the summer of 1982, The Curse of Peladon, Genesis of the Daleks, and Earthshock were edited into two 50-minute blocks for transmission and attained roughly 5 million viewers. Repeats of current stories throughout Peter Davison's era were also running in the summers of the early 1980s. These were to be the last remaining reruns of Doctor Who on the BBC until the early 1990s. Aside from the screening of a pilot episode on BBC2 in August 1991, as part of a celebration of the BBC's Lime Grove studios, the programme was regularly repeated on the BBC around the time of the programme's 30th anniversary. Throughout the autumn of 1991, BBC2 began their repeats of cult TV, scheduling various older franchises, including Star Trek, Battlestar Galactica, Gerry Anderson's Super Marionation programs, and even the more recent shows such as The Simpsons. Joining on the BBC's minority channel was to be Doctor Who, starting in early 1992. The intention was to air at least one story across the original 7 Doctors in the BBC's Friday night cult slot, alongside specially made short films and documentary, which would span over 2 years. The Time Meddler represented the first Doctor's era, publicly showing the story for the first time since its recovery back to the archives in 1985. The Mind Robber for the second Doctor era, and the Sea Devils for the third Doctor era. These stories were shown in early 1992 before the repeats returned in November that year in the same viewing slot. The Demons, recently colorised by the newly formed Doctor Who restoration team, started the new reruns. This was the first time these new colorisations of the serial were publicly shown, and led to the successful launch of more colorisations of Third Doctor stories. Continuing throughout until May 1993 were repeats of stories representing the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th Doctor serials, with Genesis of the Daleks, The Caves of Androzani, Revelation of the Daleks, and Battlefield. For the 30th anniversary, Planet of the Daleks was shown on BBC1 on Friday nights throughout November and December 1993. All 6 parts aired under the umbrella title Doctor Who and the Daleks, and each was preceded by a short 5-minute anniversary-themed documentary. Episode 3 of the serial, then only available in black and white, was the first time a black and white episode of the programme was shown on BBC1 since 1969, and the first time a story was shown on BBC1 since the end of season 26 in 1989. The BBC decided to continue running episodes of the series onwards, beginning with The Green Death, with the intention to continue showing the remainder of 1970 stories in Sunday lunchtime slots on BBC2 at 12 p.m. However, poor ratings led to BBC2 recommencing their scheduled Doctor Who reruns with Pyramids of Mars. Ratings did not improve much, and the BBC ceased their transmissions of repeating older Doctor Who stories for the time being. Although it was a digital channel, BBC Choice was launched on September 1998 and began a healthy rerun of Doctor Who stories throughout 1998 and 1999. The channel was launched as BBC's answer to rival Sky's satellite channels. BBC Choice began an extensive repeat season on their channel to coincide with the 35th anniversary of Doctor Who.
The Take, 35 years of Doctor Who, which had specially created idents and trailers, took place between Sunday the 22nd to Friday the 27th of November 1998. These included the showing of various factual programmes shown on BBC1 around the time of the 30th anniversary in 1993, along with single episode instalments of adventures of various Doctors. Genesis of the Daleks was shown in full, and the BBC showed the TV movie for the first time since its debut in the UK in May 1996. The Doctor Who themed evenings were presented by Sylvester McCoy from a newly constructed TARDIS interior, that which was planned for season 27 had the series continued into the 1990s. The repeat also contained special interviews with fans at 1998's Panopticon convention. Part of BBC Choice's schedules included reruns of the aforementioned Genesis of the Daleks and the TV movie, but also Terror of the Zygons and the pilot episode, along with the final installments of various episodes of each Doctor's tenure, as a special tribute to the launch of the BBC's Walking with Dinosaurs series. BBC Choice ran various programmes that were dinosaur themed. This included the 1974 serial Invasion of the Dinosaurs.
All 6 episodes were repeated twice throughout October and November as part of Dino Night. Episode 1 was broadcast in black and white, having existed only in black and white at this time. Episode 3 was an extended version of the serial that featured the deleted scenes reinserted into the episode. This was to be BBC Choice's final rerun of Doctor Who. BBC2 immediately picked up Doctor Who in November 1999 with a special Doctor Who themed night on Saturday the 13th of November. This was a special run of programmes dedicated to the series and ran on BBC2, the first time the series had been shown on the BBC since March 1994. The night was hosted by Tom Baker, who was in a redesigned TARDIS interior, and was produced by BBC Manchester.
The programme primarily featured various comedy sketches and programmes dedicated to the series' history and monsters, which featured stars such as Peter Davison, Mark Gatiss, and David Walliams. Special Dalek idents were created for this lineup. Between the programmes, 5 CGI animated shorts featuring the Daleks were broadcast, each about 5 to 10 seconds in length. Among the special featurettes shown throughout the night was the final episode of the Daleks, alongside the TV movie. The Doctor Who night was all the start of a greater scheme BBC2 had in mind. In late 1999, BBC2 controller Jane Root decided to capitalise on the BBC's back catalogue of their shows, including 1970s Doctor Who, for repeat at 6 p.m. on BBC2. Doctor Who was to be relaunched on BBC2 again, but this time the plan was to run the entire John Pertwee era of the 1970s, with 1 episode per week Tuesday nights at 6 p.m. These episodes were newly remastered by the restoration team to ensure the best broadcast quality from terrestrial TV viewing. The intention was that any story that existed in full colour or could be recolorized would be shown. As episodes of Pertwee's era suffered colour restoration problems, episodes that were not deemed to have broadcast sufficient material were not to be shown.
The repeats began on Tuesday the 16th of November. Spearhead from Space and the Silurians were repeated throughout the winter of 1999 and early 2000. And plans were afoot for a newly remastered version of Terror of the Autons. As ratings of these showings were poor, BBC2 moved to the Tom Baker era and recommenced their repeats with Genesis of the Daleks in February 2000. Revenge of the Cybermen and Terror of the Zygons had also been remastered by the team for transmission. As ratings did not improve much, BBC2's reruns of remastered episodes ended. Over the course of the next couple of decades, classic Doctor Who stories would be repeated on the BBC, usually as a tribute for an actor or a themed night around television within the context Doctor Who was made in. The programme will now be repeated on BBC4. The Web of Fear Episode 1 was repeated several times to serve in the BBC's themed nights around the London Underground or 1960s British sci-fi. Other specially themed BBC nights focusing on archaeology and more British sci-fi include runs of Spearhead from Space, The Demons, The Green Death, and The Ark in Space. From 2008, BBC4 typically showed episodes in tribute to the programme. The first was a tribute to the passing of Verity Lambert. BBC4 aired all 7 episodes of The Daleks, and in May 2011, The Hand of Fear was shown as a tribute to the passing of Elizabeth Sladen. For the 50th anniversary, An Unearthly Child was shown late at night on BBC4 on Thursday the 21st of November as part of the BBC celebrations to the programme. For Christmas 2015, BBC4 wanted to air a classic Doctor Who story that had aired around the festive period. The Face of Evil was selected, having been shown on New Year's Day 1977. The story was shown between the Christmas and New Year period on BBC4. This was to be the last time a complete, full uncut story was ran on the BBC. It would be 8 years later before terrestrial BBC would reshow any classic Doctor Who. On the 1st of November 2023, As part of the 60th anniversary celebrations, almost the entirety of the original series' run from 1963 to 1989 was made available for streaming on BBC Iplayer. This gave viewers the opportunity to watch for free the entirety of 20th century Doctor Who through streaming on a free viewing platform. Also as part of the series' 60th anniversary celebration was the first colorization of a black and white era story, The Daleks. A colorized version of the story, titled The Daleks in Color, was screened on the date of the 60th anniversary of the series' debut on BBC4. This was the start of a few edited compilations of stories that were aimed to combine stories into feature-length edits and that were updated for a 21st century audience, as opposed to simply re-showing the original episodes as they were broadcast. With the BBC opening up the entire history of the programme for streaming, these new edits were aimed not to replace, but to complement the original versions. Pyramids of Mars was the story selected to represent the Fourth Doctor era in the Tales of the TARDIS series on BBC iPlayer. The new Pyramids of Mars edit was shown on Thursday the 20th of June 2024 on BBC4. The final repeat of classic Doctor Who on terrestrial BBC, as of the end of 2024, was a colorization of the War Games. In the same format as the Daleks was colorized the previous year, the War Games in color were shown on BBC4 at 9 p.m. on Monday the 23rd of December 2024. Generally speaking, over the years, the BBC have shown the same stories over and over again. Genesis of the Daleks, The Ark in Space, Pyramids of Mars, Spearhead from Space, The Demons, The Sea Devils, The Green Death, An Unearthly Child, The Daleks, and the TV movie have typically been the stories that have been re-screened the most. It is important to remember the significance of older stories being repeated on terrestrial television in an age where streaming and physical media were scarce. The opportunity to watch something that was not current, or the opportunity to get to watch something for a second or even a third time, was a luxury for viewers for a very long time. These repeats of older stories on the BBC hold a nostalgic place for fans. For some, the opportunity to rewatch older episodes of Doctor Who was the first time that some fans would have gained a chance to see the series. Understanding the medium in which classic Doctor Who was produced in provides invaluable insight into the context that television had on people's day-to-day lives, particularly when television was a new medium of leisure. The repeat runs of Doctor Who are not redundant. The BBC will continue to rerun older stories of the series, whether this is dedicated to the anniversary of the series in tribute to passing actors, adding in all new special effects, new colorizations, festive celebrations, or themed tributes dedicated to the context the programme was made in, or even to the series itself.